So is there like a quote from one of your characters that has really become one of the definitive moments through your story process while you wrote Sunday Slave?
Deals with the devil are a dime a dozen, and the devil wants his due.
I think that's marketing enough for you to buy the comic, right? Okay, so, I mean, we're going to go back a bit. We had a discussion about how you mentioned Nero, which is one of your firsts. But I want to just deviate a little bit more to one of your more popular ones that have done very well and you won an award for, Shaka. Is there a way for people to buy it, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your journey behind that one and what led you from that to this?
Shaka Rising and King Shaka were two comic books I wrote in 2018, 2019. They are different because Sunday Slave and most of the work I do is self-published. It's on my own scheme, it's on my own dime. But the Shaka books was something I was approached by a publisher who was familiar with my other work. I'd worked with them in sort of an illustration capacity before. And they were creating a publishing imprint with an American company. The intent was to tell African stories for a global audience. And I'm aware I'm a white guy, but so it's not a story I would have actually tackled on my own, because there is a lot of cultural and political weight to the tale of Shaka. However, the interesting thing about Shaka is that quite uniquely, he is a character who is as much myth as he is history. I mean, when we think of Shaka, most of us have the 80s Henry Mele miniseries in our head. I mean, even the statue that was briefly up at the airport, that was his likeness. We don't know what the guy actually looked like. So that was the baseline I started with to tell the story. There was a lot of research involved because there is history. The guy did exist, we all know that. But what I found in my research was that most of this history was written by white settlers that glamorized themselves and their intent. You know, the Diary of Henry Finn is pretty much what that 80s miniseries was based on, and it's the largest written record we have of Shaka's reign. At the time, the Zulu culture didn't have written records. It was oral storytelling tradition, which itself makes for beautiful storytelling. You can use a great frame narrative there. But the actual written records of Shaka's reign are very biased. So there was a lot of digging to be done, and there was a lot of the books are marketed as historical fiction because there are one retelling of Shaka's story. There are many retellings, but the way I wrote it, and it goes back to what I was saying, I don't speak from experience. I am not Zulu, I did not live at the time, but I tapped into empathy of what drives human beings. And King Shaka is often viewed historically as, you know, this bloodthirsty dictator, this military strategist, this violent man, but he was all of those things, but he was also a lot more. There was a lot of nuance and complexity. The most interesting thing I found about Shaka was that apart from being this linchpin of violence in the 17th century, he was actually the first diplomat. He was the first Zulu king who had to deal with like white settlers. You know, he was the first guy who actually had to change the way that he was living, the way that his people were living at the time. So far from being, you know, the bloodthirsty barbarian that the diaries of the white settlers made him out to be, he was actually the first diplomat. He had to do things that no other Zulu king had to do at the time. And again, I'm not a king, but what drives a human being. Kings are just like us, you know. I mean, I don't share the same belief systems, I don't share the same cultural background, but it's less about what I believe and more about what belief makes people do, what culture makes people do. Me being a bit of a spiritually empty vessel, I think advantages me because I can hypothesize and I can theorize. And I wasn't really concerned about what sort of reception the King Shaka books would get, but it was overwhelmingly great. I was so honored to get some of the feedback. They were marketed initially overseas, and then they were republished here in South Africa, and they were sold also as like historical comics, like educationally historical. So there was an educational, informational section at the back, you know, with pronunciation guides, glossaries. I used a lot of like actual language, but the reception to the books was just so humbling. And currently they're taught in from primary schools here in South Africa to penitentiaries in America. One of the coolest emails I got was from someone doing what do you call it, GED in America, and this person had introduced both Shaka books into a prison library in Arizona or Alabama, and the prisoners, and I think it's worth noting that, you know, the prison population in America is predominantly young black male. And they were so popular. These books were so well received, you know, and it was just, it was humbling. It was a privilege to get the opportunity to write the books, and it was an honor to get the feedback that I did. And I think they're worth reading. You can pick them up on Amazon or Take-A-Lot. Sunday Slave is still exclusive to Ike's, but Shaka Rising and its sequel King Shaka, you can Google them, they'll be available. I don't know, maybe Ike's can actually get you in touch with the publishers, you can get a few copies for yourself. But yeah, that was a great experience, you know, and it was also really cool to just have that reach. I love you guys, I'm glad you're all here, but the reach of my self-published comics is mostly I'm hawking them out my backpack at bars. So to hear from people overseas was just amazing. Really cool.
Before we get further interruptions with mic interference, any lasting words to some comic book aficionados or even enthusiasts or aspiring comic book artists / writers in the audience today?
You got to do it for the love. If you are going into comics or anything, any creative sphere, if you're going into it with the idea that I'm going to get rich, you're going into it the wrong way. A lot of the time, I think, and we see it everywhere, a lot of the time, art has become product, creativity has become a production line, trends are followed, fan service is pandered to. You can't do any of that. You've got to go into it doing it because you love it. And if you love it, that will come through in the work. And you will bring fans and readers and listeners and viewers. You will bring them to your work. It is not your job to make work for them. Do your own thing. Do what you love. That's the best advice I can give anybody.
Guys, I would like to thank you so much for being here. I think that's a wrap. Any questions from the audience?
So much respect for you, man. You hold down the anti-hero so well in all of your storytelling, and you talk about empathy, and the thing about the anti-hero is that, you know, we're all redeemable in something. The dirtier, the more redeemable. I just want to know what your approach would be to like a stock standard hero character. Like, what is the hero character in your stories, you know?
There ain't no heroes, man. I mean, if you're writing a real hero, you're not writing a relatable character. And I say that with superheroes being first and forefront of popular culture, but that's just not my thing. I mean, I can appreciate them for what they are, you know, an ideal, perhaps, a power fantasy, perhaps. I mean, you can look at heroes in a pretty dark light too. Actually, I'm not going to go into. I think heroes as an ideal are noble, and especially for youngsters. It's good. These are the superheroes are for today are the same as the Greek heroes or the Norse heroes. I mean, Marvel literally lifted Thor out of a different mythology. But I think more people now probably recognize Thor as someone from the Avengers as they do a Norse thunder god. But personally, for me, I can't write heroes. I need more nuance. I need more complexity. And heck, even kids, I think, from a young age should be aware of that. I see your Lighty reading my comics, and you know what I want to say? They're not for kids, but, I think it's important. It's important for comics to be educational as well as entertaining, and I think it's important for the characters in those comics to be relatable, at least on some level, in some way. I think even the best superhero stories, they have flaws, they have weaknesses. I mean, even like Achilles had a heel, and sometimes that is. Sometimes it's a physical weakness. Sometimes it's a human weakness. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's family issues. I suppose my answer to your question is that I don't believe in a true hero, because a true hero is not relatable. And if I'm not relating to the character, then why am I reading about him?
Yeah, before we get more questions, but I think I can probably just attest to that, because the first time you and I met was when I invited you to my premiere for my film Saloon, which was nominated for Cannes. In Saloon, the character in Kanyamba is very much similar to Rondo in terms of he's a broken person first. He comes across as, the man with no name. He's the Clint Eastwood who walks into a pub, but he's broken, he is torn, he's gone through the dirt and the mud, and you can see the blood on his fists, and he's, off the cross. I think these are elements that really give the nuance and visual medium to your hero or your protagonist. I know Rondo is kind of influenced by Robert Johnson, but the overall journey of your creation of Rondo, what gave you that soul?
In spite of the name, Rondo Sunday for me is the least interesting character. Rondo Sunday is a cipher, a tabula rasa, who affects the events and the characters around him. And that's where my fascination comes. It's not so much the character itself, it's how that title character makes everyone else behave. It's all about the other characters. There is no minor character. There's no two-dimension to any character. Everyone has nuance. And while Rondo Sunday is the eponymous character of the whole series, he is the most mysterious character. I'm not even quite sure what's driving him at base. but I know what's driving everyone else. And that's something I don't deliberately do, although I often find in my work, in a way, King Shaka was similar. Obviously, there was specifically about him, so I did get into him. But I often, when I'm writing, I get very enamored and interested in the other characters, the characters around the main one, around this fulcrum, this centerpiece of what's happening, of the events, of the history of the world that I'm creating, whether it be Rondo Sunday, or Sunday Slave, or King Shaka, or Nero, sci-fi, cyberpunk. And again, I think that's something that almost happens like instinctually for me, but I always find it interesting because it does enable me to make every character rich, to give them all substance and complexity, So yeah, I would say Rondo Sunday is a character that I don't quite understand, but I understand all the others.
Then we have a question just there in the back.
Is it reach?
No,
Just bellow, bro.
Bellow. Should I just bellow?
Bellow.
Okay. I wanted to say, surely, I love the Robert Johnson hookup, because I'm sure you're aware that Robert Crumb, also a giant of the comics scene, did a great story about Robert Johnson, and he too had a blues band. And he did a whole series of portraits of famous bluesmen of the day. So there's like a really rich tradition of the intersection of music and comic that you're carrying on there. And I fully what I wanted to ask is that I totally agree that those one-dimensional goody two-shoes superheroes that Hollywood shits all over us, the Superman, the Batman, all of that, that kind of hero you were talking about, these like thin one-dimensional, trying to save the world from evil. There's nothing interesting about them. But there's also Alice in Borderland, there's Preacher, there's The Boys, really left field experimental graphic novel content that has been translated really well. I mean, Alice in Borderland is brilliant, so is The Boys, and The Boys is great because it takes the piss out of the superheroes with Homelander and all that bullshit. Captain America, the evil side of him. So what would it take for Netflix or Amazon Prime or whoever to pick up on Sunday Slave and give it the Preacher treatment?
Oh, I have no idea.
That's going to bring us to the conversation about adaptation, Luke. The lovely word that you're obsessed with. You want to answer that question?
Money.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting into the industry now, and as I was talking about, the conflating genre with medium, it's the same as conflating industry. I mean, the medium of comics and the industry of comics, or film or television, they're two sides of the same coin, but they're different beasts that typically eat each other. The industry eats the medium. The very nature of adaptation, I think, can be dangerous because one of those coins, one of those sides of the coin is considered nothing more than a stepping stone to the silver screen. Having said that, there's a part of me that would love to see Sunday Slave as a Netflix series. I actually, Mayashala Ali as Rondo Sunday, he's my fan casting. And I also, when I write characters, especially in Sunday Slave, because a lot of the characters have quite thick accents. Like I imagine Tally Strager, the prostitute sorceress. She speaks like she's got the accent of the young Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs. The craven wretch Cyrus Daggett has a thick Cajun accent. He sounds like Jean-Claude Van Damme in Hard Target, if you've ever watched that movie. So I find myself in front of the mirror actually, pronouncing their words. And what would it take to get an actual adaptation? I have no clue, Alex. I mean, I don't know how that side of things work. There have been NDAs notwithstanding. I've been in contact with a couple of parties overseas who have exhibited interest in Shaka for that sort of thing. But I'll keep you informed when I know more about that. But with the nature of adaptation, like, my work on this comic is done. Like, I don't really have an interest in readapting my own work unless I'm doing it all. So if someone wants to adapt my work, I'd be happy to be a sort of story consultant, but they've got to do their own thing with it. They've got to make it something else. And the irony being that, a comic book is a ready-made storyboard. Every film you've ever watched start out is ostensibly a comic book. But I still feel it requires more than that. An adaptation needs to be more. It needs to have something that is a comic can do things that a movie can't, and vice versa. And I think people forget that sometimes. But practically speaking, I have no idea how that side of things works. If people contact me, I'm happy to, in Netflix execs or whatever, I'm happy to chat. But
and what if it was a faithful adaptation? The Oatmeal, he's now been allowed. Netflix has bought Exploding Kittens, his card game, and he is literally overseeing the production of every single frame that is drawn, and it's animated. It's not
I mean, I think that's getting into the specifics of what the original creator wants. And are you talking about Exploding Kittens, the game?
Yeah, he's turned it into a TV series.
I enjoy that game, but it's not like there was too much character nuance and complexity to begin with. So, hey, maybe I'm mistaken. I mean, I think that's getting into the specifics of what the original creator sees the adaptation of being. And there are instances where I think the second incarnation, an adaptation of an original source material, it doesn't happen often, but I do think the Blade Runner movie was better than Philip K. Dick's story. Just saying, occasionally. But they got to do different things, as Blade Runner did. And if they're going to make something out of Sunday's Slave, they got to do something interesting.
It's an interpretation.
Yeah, interpretation, that's it. But even in interpretation, I feel by the very nature of that, there's a transformation as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question. There's a phrase you used quite often while you're talking to us. I developed an ability in blah, blah, blah. I developed an ability. One, for example, said, during this period of time when I was young, I developed an ability in making art and drawing, okay? Now, I think you were just born with this. You were born and instantly you had this. I can work my whole life and I will not draw a stick figure. I can't do this shit, Okay, I can't. I can guarantee. Now, but here's the question. Another thing you said is you work alone, you don't work in collaborations, you don't know. Okay. I want you to talk about the formal educational period that you went through, where you had a very formalized collaboration with educational institutes. To what extent was that a collaboration that has made you the person you are? Was it productive? Talk a bit about that, partly as a message to young people who might think, hey, I've got this, I can do this, I can kick ass, I'm going to be the king of the world, and then suddenly you realize actually the world's not really like that, and you have to go through a kind of whole process. You've got to make alliances, you've got to have collaborations with educational institutes. I want to hear about that part of that collaboration in your life, how it's worked.
The question is how did I deal with the idea of collaboration through my education, and speaking on the idea you believe there is something that I was just born with, and that's why I do what I do. That's bullshit.
Okay.
I don't believe in the idea of talent. I appreciate the intent when people come to me and say, "Oh, you're so talented. Oh, well, you're so gifted." But that's just but the nature of those words. It takes agency away from me. It says that this is something that I was just born with, and no one else could possibly do what I do, which I believe is patently untrue. If you can write your name, you can write a novel. It's all about the way you think. And practice, perseverance, perspiration, that's a huge part of it. Work is required. But the idea that people are just born with some God-given talent seems so ridiculous to me. It takes agency away from humanity. I mean, when people say that to me, I appreciate where it's coming from. I get that. And moving on to the idea, I know I was scorning collaboration, but I can totally understand that is necessary. That does work. Some people do their best work collaboratively. I totally get that, but I don't think one should force oneself into those sorts of creative spheres if you feel you can do it better on your own. During my tertiary education, during my brief stint at Rhodes, which I left out of the biography I gave to Cedric, I didn't complete that degree. I flunked out after a year because I started introducing comics into my assignments, and they were really not interested in that. The lecturer said to me, "Comic books are for adolescents." And I was like, well. And that's when I knew it just wasn't for me. When I came back to Durban, I did graphic design, which, I mean, logo, visual branding, that's not my thing, I don't dig that. But the graphic design course itself was far more comprehensive. They welcomed my comic books, you know. They were open to a whole lot more, and I got a much broader understanding and skill set, which I still utilize today. And I did the collaboration required. I did the group projects. And when I say I did the group projects, I did the group projects. Everyone else just got in my way. And you know what? We got really good marks because I did the group projects. But hey, you know, I don't condone it for everybody, but solo efforts have always worked for me.
Thank you.
I think. Okay.
I think the first speaker is about to say, oh.
First your question, and then the ultimate question.
It's gone off again.
I have. Actually, with regards to this sort of thing, you know, because I like steampunk because it does, in a way, it works off kind of, you know, period pieces, like fashion, like it's old school stuff combined with, you know, futuristic endeavors. So I've thought about it, but I think if I did a steampunk thing, I'd have to come up with a completely new story, a completely new world, you know. But I've never had writer's block. The only thing that's stopping me doing all of this stuff is I don't have enough hands to get it done, you know. So steampunk is on the menu one of these days. I'll keep you subscribed.
Okay, so the final and ultimate question, your favorite use of the word graphic novel.
Oh, I hate that too.
So, what do you think is the issue with the industry for deviating away from comic books as a term to graphic novel as a term?
Well, it's simple. The term graphic novel was a clever marketing gimmick come up with in the 80s to sell more comic books, and it worked. I think it was right about when Alan Moore was doing. DC was flagging in the 80s, and they were bringing all these British authors from overseas, Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, and they gave them these obscure DC characters, and these guys single-handedly reinvigorated the entire industry. But they did it in such a way that DC, who had just been doing superhero stuff, aimed at an audience of 8 to 12-year-olds, let's be honest, because that's what superheroes are originally created for. DC didn't know how to market this stuff, like Watchmen, I mean, Alan Moore's run and Swamp Thing, Grant Morrison's Invisibles. So they were like, we need to come up with a new word for this. Let's call it graphic novels. Let's put them on coffee tables and let's give them hard covers. And it worked. Marketing versus, industry versus medium, it worked. It did sell comics. It reinvigorated DC. But for me, the term graphic novel has always annoyed me because it is a literal misnomer. It's like you don't call cinema moving pictures. It's more than the sum of its parts. If you're calling comic books graphic novels, you're saying, oh, they've got elements of graphics and they're like they've got words, graphic novels. But there's so much more than that, They are their own thing. It's not just sticking two bits together. If anything, comics share more in common with cinema than they do with literature. I love literature, don't get me wrong. I appreciate a good book. But the things that comic books do, even the way I write them, I'm thinking of camera angles, I'm thinking of lighting, I'm thinking of cinematic techniques, not literary techniques. So the term graphic novel for me has been little more than something to market more comic books. It's a meaningless term and you should all stop using it.
How do you feel about that? DC creating buffers for itself to be able to push some of those hard.
I don't understand what you said and I refuse to answer it.
All right, guys, thank you so much for coming. And please purchase a copy. Is there one more question?
One more?
Yeah, we'll take one more. Set it up.
They say that a lot of stories are derivative of others and with archetypes and tropes. And would you say that how can one develop originality?
It's just figuring out ways to tell those same stories. I agree with that. I mean, they say there's 7 stories, but they also say there's 2 stories. I'm a big proponent of there only being 2 stories. Stranger comes to town, stranger goes on a journey. Sunday Slave is both of those things. It's all about working the tropes, working the existing structures of those stories. It's all about developing the characters in those stories. Their stories are just a framework to do something extraordinary. And again, I'm talking within comic books, within cinema, within literature. It's about how you use the existing frameworks, how you use the tropes, the cliches, the characters. Just put your own spin on it, and make it about the characters, make it about the human beings, or the superheroes, if you must.
It's like what my old teacher used to say. There's no such thing as originality. It's what you do with it. What? It's what you do with it that defines it. So anyway, thank you so much, guys, for coming. Please enjoy your drink and enjoy the comic.
I'll be around if you all want me to score my